Would you look at this mess? The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. What a tragedy. The largest pile of garbage since Independence Day resurgence. Topical humour. Way to date yourself, Alex. I should have learned by now never to do that. The last time I dated myself, we got busted fooling around in the back of a movie theatre. Maybe that's what spoiled the movie for me. Quite the predicament.
What a predicament!
Thank you for downloading episode 10 of What a Predicament. Double digits, baby! My name is Alex Bain, and my own perilous predicament, having been swept out into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, it's made me a little more sensitive to the predicaments of others. So over the last 10 weeks, I've tried to delve into some of the big picture and little picture issues alike. Is there going to be a place for the humble ad in the future?
What a great question.
The best example is dinosaurs, let's face it.
The band signed a 4-figure deal with Liberation before the first album. We're talking high 4 figures?
Modest 4 figures.
So would it be fair to say that you are the man?
That's an interesting question. I don't think we're the man.
There is a scene in Lord of the Rings where Gollum is in the caves and he's freaking out about the ring and all the twisting of his feet, his wet feet on the rocks. That's all me.
Now, I couldn't possibly allege that John Key would have been a coke-using banker.
Why did you kill JFK?
Why did who? We were at a party in Germany and we all had to sign release forms. It was so scripted, it was just bollocks.
See, that wouldn't have happened on Mussolini's watch. And now, here we are. Now, you might be thinking that this episode is going to be peering into the predicament of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. But no, I love my consumer goods and the convenience of profit above all capitalism too much to shoot myself in the foot like that. This week on the podcast, I reflect on another product of the modern age that's also getting bigger by the day and demands attention. Podcasts. I don't know when it happened, but the podcasting revolution came, and I, for one, welcome our new digital audio overlords. And people just eat them up.
What podcasts do I listen to? Well, I probably started with This American Life, of course. There's another great one called Transom.
Stuff You Should Know is a good one. Edgeland as well.
I listen to Freakonomics. I listen to 60 Second Mind and 60 Second Science.
Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Outstanding.
I listen to the Bill Simmons Report. I listen to the MMA Report. They all sound the same.
A lot of them are American. democracyatwork.info.
I love the Guys We Fucked podcast. It's my favourite.
These days, no matter what your passion is, there's a podcast that's all about it. And there are all sorts of reasons one might download a podcast.
I like getting information, but also in an entertaining way. I like long-form interviews where a celebrity or a sports star can talk about things other than the cliche questions, like about their upcoming movie.
Different ways of looking at different questions. Asking questions which a person would never have heard and therefore never thought about.
I mainly listen to them when I'm on my way places, so I like them to be quite entertaining but easy. Like if I get there and have to pause it, I can do that and not miss something.
Yeah, primarily information, but sometimes, so like, the art of the spoken word is interesting, or the art of sound, actually.
But just what are podcasts? The word podcast is a portmanteau of the words pod from iPod and the cast from broadcast. Despite having pod in the name, podcasts were not invented by Apple. That part of the name comes more from iPod being a common shorthand for any digital audio player, kind of like Walkman back in the day was for any cassette player or for Xbox Live players. The word podcast is defined in the Oxford English Dictionary as a digital audio file of speech music, broadcast material, etc., made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or portable media player, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. What am I doing? Reading from a dictionary. Despite being a podcaster, I clearly don't know much about it. As if the last 9 episodes of What a Predicament wasn't already a dead giveaway of that little fact. For this one, I need to call in the experts. I reached out to
Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast.com. I host a weekly podcast about podcasting where I teach podcasters how to improve their podcasts. I'm really meta like that. But I also make products and services for podcasters, like a membership community for existing podcasters to learn how to improve their shows. I have a training course on search engine optimization for podcasters. I have a WordPress plugin I designed for podcasters. And I have a service that goes and gathers all of your international podcast reviews from all 155 iTunes stores, plus other podcast directories, and sends them to you on a regular basis. So I'm really passionate about helping podcasters share their message with the world through this power that we have in podcasting.
He's somewhat of a podcast guru, and his podcast, the perfectly titled The Audacity to Podcast, helped me get my head around what I was doing when I started What a Predicament. I tracked Daniel down to see what I could learn and go over some of the basics, because despite doing one for the last 10 weeks, I don't even really know what a podcast is. So, obviously, I know what a podcast is, but for the layperson out there, what's a podcast?
A podcast is technically a label for a particular kind of distribution for a show. So the way I like to describe it is a podcast is like an on-demand radio or TV show, but you can download a podcast episode and download every episode automatically through the internet by subscribing for free with an app on your computer or smartphone or some other mobile device. There are audio podcasts and video podcasts about almost any topic you like. And the engaging conversations are hosted by people like you or me or anyone else, sometimes literally from their basements or their garages or their bedroom closets, or maybe they have a studio. And people can listen to these podcasts from anywhere about almost anything. So it's really a distribution method, but a lot of new shows, audio shows or video shows, have found an audience, an international audience, because they've distributed it primarily as a podcast, so people across the world can download every episode automatically. But a podcast is not the label of a kind of show. So, for example, if there's a radio show that you listen to in the United States, I could take Sean Hannity, for example, is a radio commentary, or Dave Ramsey is someone who has a radio show that's on terrestrial broadcast radio. That's a show. He distributes it through the radio, but he also distributes it through the internet, downloadable through this thing we call an RSS feed. So that makes it also a podcast. So you see, the same kind of content can be distributed in different ways. And podcasts then are distributed through the internet, episode after episode, downloadable. But many people choose that, like I do, choose that as their primary distribution. And that's how many people will consume that content as well. I have people listening from all over the world to our different podcasts, and many other podcasters have that same connection with a global audience, and it's really exciting.
In doing some research for this episode, I was trying to articulate the best way to describe what an RSS feed is to actually talk about the logistics, but I'm finding it quite hard to put into layman's terms. Would you have any more luck with that?
Yeah, RSS stands for, one of the things it stands for is really simple syndication. And the technology of RSS and XML feeds may sort of disappear in the minds of the average public, and we don't necessarily have to know how it works. Just like when you type in google.com, you don't have to know what kind of code is going on in the background. You just know you go to google.com and you use it to search the internet. RSS will become that kind of thing, where I think the technology will continue, but it will be in kind of the background where most people, maybe not even podcasters someday, will have to worry about it. However, what is RSS itself? It's a method of syndicating content across the internet. So instead of going to your favorite 12 sites on the internet every day looking to see if there's new content from those sites, you can subscribe to those sites often through an RSS feed. And what that allows you to do is you have a single app that you use, some kind of RSS reader or a client, and it's subscribed to separate RSS feeds from each site. So you load that one app, and it has content from all of those 12 sites syndicated into that one app. So then you can very easily see all the new content from those dozen other websites without having to go and visit all of them. That's the core technology for a podcast too. So you use a podcast app, like there's one built into the iPhone or into Samsung Android phones or some of the Windows phones, or you can get a podcast app for free. And that becomes the way that you can subscribe to several different podcasts. And then instead of going to all of those separate podcast websites to look for a new episode, you just load your one app, and all of that content is syndicated into that one app automatically on a regular basis whenever there's new content.
That's the terminology I was looking for. So when did you realize that podcasting was even a thing and decide to throw your hat in the ring?
I think I had heard about podcasts early in 2005, but it didn't really catch my attention until the middle of 2005 when Steve Jobs announced in an Apple keynote that the next version of iTunes, version 4.9, would support podcasts. And my boss at that time said, "Oh, this is going to be huge. This is wonderful that you'll be able to subscribe to podcasts inside of iTunes." So when iTunes 4.9 came out, I decided to try and find out what are podcasts and what kind of content is out there. I listened to the radio show and audio dramas before, so I was familiar with the power of audio. And you could hear interviews, you could hear stories, you could hear content, teaching, training, comedy, whatever. So I went on iTunes and I searched for something very general. I just typed in technology. And I found This Week in Tech, hosted by Leo Laporte, and The Jesus Geek, hosted by John Wilkerson. And at some point, too, I found Grammar Girl, hosted by Mignon Fogarty. And those were my first few podcasts that I found, subscribed to, and I really enjoyed them. So much that during my 75-minute commute to and from work, I didn't have an MP3 player. This was before the iPhone. I had a laptop computer with iTunes installed on it. And what I would do is I would download the podcasts to my computer, load iTunes on my computer, and put my laptop computer in the passenger seat of my car and play the podcast episodes through the speakers. And that kept my mind engaged while I was on this really long drive to and from work. And that's how I fell in love with podcasts.
They've kind of come as part of a whole cultural shift as well. The same thing with television, with the advent of things like Netflix, where people are not really being tied down to traditional broadcast anymore. People are able to, there's a market for things that are very niche and a much broader range of producers.
Exactly. It's niche, or niche there for your United Kingdom audience, and it's on my schedule. It's on demand. And that's the power, like you're saying, with Netflix and with podcasts. Like if you really enjoy web design, you're never going to find a TV show about web design or a terrestrial or satellite radio show about web design. But there are hundreds of podcasts about web design. There are dozens of podcasts specifically about WordPress or developing WordPress plugins or how to use WordPress, that kind of thing. So you can really niche down on the content, as well as when you find these episodes, you can then download the past 20, 30, 50, 100, 200, however many episodes they have, and listen to it whenever you want. It's not like you have to sit at your radio or at your TV and tune in right at that moment. It's kind of like TiVo in that sense, or DVR, but you don't have to be there to record it. You just subscribe and the episodes download automatically, and you can then listen to them anywhere, anytime, through almost any device.
Because I'm a newer podcaster. This is only episode 10 that I'm working on right now. And you have a business as a consultant for podcasts. What are some of the common things you see people get wrong, especially in the early stages of podcasting?
The most common mistake in the beginning is focusing too much on the technology. Yes, certain things break, and often people have hired me to help them fix certain aspects of that. But I've seen some podcasters obsess over picking the perfect microphone for their voice, and they may spend years. I know of one person who spent years going through microphone after microphone after microphone. They never launched their show. They were getting too obsessed with the technology. And I see a lot of podcasters focus on that technology, but not focus on the most important thing, and that is, what is the message they want to share? What is that content? How are they going to communicate it? So the technology should really be the easy part. You get a microphone. It doesn't have to be the perfect microphone. You can upgrade later on. But you need a microphone, you need a website, you need the RSS, that kind of technology, and it's fairly easy to get that in place. But where you should spend most of your time is in planning, in figuring out what kind of show do you want to have? What is your message that you want to share with the world? What is the value you want to get from hosting the podcast? And what is the value you want to give to your audience as they listen or watch the podcast?
And on an episode-to-episode basis, is there such a thing as too much preparation? Like the most recent episode I had was probably the one that I did the least amount of research and the least amount of preparation for. It was basically just a half-hour conversation with a couple of people, but it ended up being one of my favorite episodes. Just the sort of things we covered was really interesting, and I feel it was funny. Do you think there's such a thing as too much preparation?
I'm not so sure that there is, unless that preparation is preventing you from launching something. And that's what can happen to many people. Usually it's on the other side. They've already recorded the episode, and then they're trying to perfect it, edit out every single and mouth noise and awkward pause or anything like that. They're trying to make their audio perfect. And perfection prevents you from launching something. It's better to launch and improve than try to perfect and never launch at all. So I think that maybe there is some level of you've prepared too much, but I've never actually seen that unless it's someone is out there still preparing because they've never launched yet. I think, though, the preparation, while it is extremely important to prepare your content, prepare the message that you're going to share, the time that you invest in that preparation may be in different areas. Like when you say that you have a conversation with some people or you interview someone, your preparation may be in the years that you've known that person, so that it's very easy for you to sit down and have a great conversation for an hour or half an hour and provide great value in that conversation. The preparation has already been there, even though you didn't necessarily sit down and create an outline. An outline is good to use. That way you can know generally where do you want to go with this conversation, what do you want to pull from it. I mean, you and I even have a general outline of where this conversation is going, but we're veering off that outline here and there as the conversation dictates, and we're providing good content toward that. So in this aspect, you spent the preparation in coming up with the questions, the topics that you want to talk about. My preparation for this is my years of experience in this area. And the combination of those two things allows us to put great content out there without actually spending time to say, okay, I will ask this, you will say that, then I will say this, then you'll say that.
Yeah, I could have just got a Microsoft SAM or something if I wanted to script everything.
Yeah.
What do you see the future holding for podcasting in general in terms of either the formats evolving or other players getting involved? We've got big companies like Facebook and Google throwing their hats in the ring. What do you know about some of those things? And maybe what some of the emerging things we may see 5-10 years down the line?
I think we'll see, and we are seeing this right now, podcasts becoming an additional common mainstream distribution method. Like everyone in the world is pretty much familiar with radio, TV, the internet, although the internet is really a whole collage of different kinds of distribution methods. But we have books, we have newspapers, magazines. People are familiar with these kinds of things. And I think podcasts will become one additional method for consuming content that people will be very familiar with. I think we could someday see more and more mainstream content released in podcast form for free, even like maybe it's TV shows or other content. I think that the technological aspect of podcasting will kind of diminish, and we won't be so concerned about RSS feeds in the future. But look at, for example, Spotify. It's traditionally a music platform, but they now have podcasts inside of Spotify, and people can subscribe and listen to podcasts inside of Spotify. Now, that's not something that people have to think about RSS feeds and where they go. They just load their app and they consume talk shows that they enjoy. I think that's the direction we'll see more people going. And the big companies will jump into the podcasting space too, which brings more mainstream attention to podcasting. And then as people discover great mainstream content inside of podcasts, they'll also discover that independent content that's more niche, more passionate, and that content that the average person might be much more interested in for their particular place in life. So podcasts and podcasting will only grow. I think that the definition of what a podcast is will kind of be blurred, and we may at some point move away from the word podcast. I'm not saying that we need to change it, but we may think more in terms of shows, and you can get a show through Netflix, or you can get it through a podcast, you can get it through the radio, you can get it through the TV. It's the same show, but podcast might be one additional distribution method the world will become familiar with.
So just very quickly to sort of wrap this whole thing up, you've sort of basically, from at least what I can see all the way in the South Pacific Ocean, it seems like you've made a career in podcasting with all the different avenues you're involved in. And when you talk about your passion and stuff, you've really been able to make a career doing your passion. Would you say podcasts make dreams come true?
They certainly can. It's not a guaranteed way. This is not the magic solution for many people. But what it does do is it's a powerful way that people can connect authentically with a worldwide audience that you can't get in many other methods. And I think that's what makes podcasting so powerful.
Podcasts are a powerful tool, and the number of podcasts grows by the day. Globally, as of the time of recording, there are over 13 podcasts. More than just entertainment, they can deliver public service announcements, news, education, and even be catalysts for justice. The hugely popular podcast Serial by Sarah Koenig told the story of the murder of Baltimore teen Heyman Lee and the subsequent conviction of her ex-boyfriend Adnan Syed. Serial was one of the most successful podcasts of all time for a reason. It's a super engaging, well-told, real-life whodunit that inspired many spin-off podcasts, one of which, undisclosed, actually dug up information which helped secure Adnan Syed a new trial. iTunes is the place most people go to download their podcasts, and it charts the most downloaded on a day-to-day basis. As of the time of writing, the top 10 most popular podcasts in New Zealand are: Number 10, This American Life. Number 9, Fletch, Vaughan and Megan. Number 8, Magic Lessons with Elizabeth Gilbert. Number 7, The Tony Robbins Podcast. Number 6, Serial. Number 5, My Dad Wrote a Porno. Number 4, The Psychology Podcast. Number 3, Revisionist History. Number 2, TED Talks. And number 1, Stuff You Should Know. So it's good to know that at least I'm ripping off the best. I did try and find out what position What a Predicament sat at, but the iTunes chart only displays the top 200 in each genre, so at best we're 201, but I suspect it's closer to 203 or 4. All of the podcasts in the top 10 have hundreds of episodes and multiple people involved, not to mention sponsorship support. My podcast is a one-man show. How can I compete with the big boys and girls? I needed some sort of sign, some wisdom from someone who's been in the game a lot longer than I have. Maybe one of those comedian podcasters that seem to do so well. Then I remembered something someone once told me.
Stuff You Should Know is a good one. Edgeland as well.
So, I touched base with stand-up comedian and podcaster Bill Conway of the Edgeland podcast to get set straight. You can understand my accent, okay?
Yeah, no problem. You know, I've watched Flight of the Conchords once or twice.
Oh, well, I heard your interview with Dan Smith recently. I figured you'd be used to it a little bit.
Yeah, I think he turned on an American, listening back when I was editing it, I think he turned on, like, as much as he could, some American accents at some point. So I was like, oh, yeah, like, because after we were done talking, I think he kind of turned that off a little bit. We were just chatting, you know, after the recording was off, and then I listened back, I was like, I think he's really trying to enunciate in an American accent a little bit here, but no, but yeah.
So, how long have you been podcasting?
Let's see, I think it's the Edgeland started in coming up on 3 years. So 2013, I think the first episode was in November. November of 2013, I think is what it lands on.
And when did you realize podcasting was even a thing? I think, did Fat Mike have something to do with it?
Yes, it was 100% Fat Mike. It was that No Effects EP that they released that had Jesus on the front of it. I forget the name of it because it only had one good song on there, and No Effects hasn't been really that great for a long time. But there was just a one line, the revolution isn't going to be televised, it's going to be a podcast. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing I've heard, I think. And then, went on to iTunes one day and started looking around, seeing what I might want to download. And there was just, some educational type podcasts like the Stuff You Should Know and the Stuff You Miss in History class that always interested me. So I started listening to those and then getting into comedy podcasts. And then it just evolved from there until I was listening to 8 hours of podcasts a day at my work, and then just totally, just being listening to way too many podcasts. It was warping my worldview.
Yeah, it's a hard slog sometimes getting through all of it.
Exactly. There's so many out there.
So how did you decide to go ahead with doing your own thing? I know you do stand-up comedy. Was it a sort of way to put your comedy another venue for that? Or when did you decide, all right, I'm going to do this?
So it definitely came out of stand-up comedy where here in America, there was actually a law passed by Senate that if you do stand-up comedy, you have to have a podcast. It's a law. It doesn't matter what you do. You just have to do something and release it as a podcast so your 4 friends will download it. And so I just thought, like, what do I know about? I know about being straight edge. That's what that's the only thing I know in my life is how to be straight edge. And so I did a quick Google search, said, is there anybody else doing a straight edge podcast? And there was not. So I figured I'd give it a try. And, it's a very, very specific podcast. So there's the people that will listen to it. And then there's a bunch of people that will be like, first off, what's a podcast? Second, what the hell is being straight edge? I'm like, yeah, you're the target demo.
It's because I'm a much newer podcaster. I think we're recording for episode 10. From the feedback you've gotten to, is there any advice you can give me as the sort of things that people respond to most, your most successful, most downloaded episodes? What is it about them that's made those ones work?
I really think, so since mine is an interview format, it really comes down to, I think the most downloaded episode was, Wes Isold from American Nightmare, the first time I had him on. And I think with, in Edgeland's case, a lot of people probably wondered, hey, why did Wes break Edge to begin with? Let's hear about what he has to say about being straight edge. And he's kind of been, a mysterious person a little bit here and there, and so they were interested in hearing him. But I think it comes in many different forms with podcasting. A lot of times, I think having a good guest on the show will get people, obviously, to download it. I know I've listened to plenty of podcasts when I just, search iTunes Store for like one comedian that I like which podcast has John Mulaney been on, and then I'll listen to that podcast and like that episode and be like, oh, I should check out more of these, and then either I like it or not, and we'll see how that goes from there. But yeah, I think that's a big thing, and then I think just kind of being specific or having a hook, because there is a lot of different podcasts out there that for everybody's interest, it's like almost, it's just audio pornography more or less, because there's porno for every single person out there, and there's a podcast for every single person.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the first porno set in the podcasting realm.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would never stop jerking off to that. It's just going to be nonstop.
Yeah. So, is there any mistakes as a younger podcaster or a newer podcaster? Are there any mistakes or traps you've fallen into in the past that maybe you could have some advice, things to avoid, things that work or don't?
I think the main thing is audio quality. Since it's an audio medium, I can't tell you how many times I've turned on a podcast where it just seems like, it might be some people that I want to listen to, but it seems like they just put an iPhone in the middle of a table and hit record and then consider that a podcast. And so I think that's the main thing, is just a little bit of investment in doing, a little bit of professionalism. Like, my setup for Edgeland, probably ended up costing me about $400 total with, microphone and mixer or whatever, even though I do most of my things on a laptop because people will call me and I'll just record it on Skype. But when I do have that rare in-person interview, the setup is better than just, sitting an iPhone on a table and then just doing it that way. I think that's a big problem a lot of people have, is just, why, if somebody's podcast is, hey, movie reviews, and one of them sounds like garbage and the other is well recorded, you're going to listen to the well recorded one because there's no issue with your headphones. You're going to listen to it in your car or wherever on a run, no problem. You're not going to miss anything. So I think just audio quality is priority number one as far as that is concerned.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you'd said on a recent podcast of yours about how you got into stand-up comedy, where you just saw the level of other people's ones and realized, oh, well, I can at least, if they're putting that out there, I can at least do better than that. So it's that's kind of...
Yeah, I think that's a big motivating factor.
Podcasts have blown up now. Everyone I talk to is they either don't know what they are or they're addicted to them. It's one extreme or the other. What do you see the future of podcasting being? Growing? Replaces radio or standard broadcast forms?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly think that everything that is on the radio will be available in podcast form, in the on-demand form. I think that's already pretty obvious with, here we have, your National Public Radio, all the NPR shows like This American Life are all aired on the radio, and then they're immediately put into podcast form and downloaded there and probably consumed more that way than they are on the radio. But I think, for the most part, you'll see a lot more, like, HBO is going to have a podcast, like HBO Sports podcast, that's going to exist, stuff like that. And, every major company will have some sort of sponsored thing, like the Nike running podcast or some bullshit like that. Like, there is... I'd
be surprised if that doesn't already exist.
Oh, I probably absolutely does, like hosted by like Prefontaine's son or something like that. Who knows? Or, Usain Bolt's cousin or something like that. But there's going to be there's already so many podcasts when you just look at the iTunes store, and then you wonder, I'm a big fan of the UFC, and I'll look, and they have a podcast now that's hosted by Matt Serra and Jim Norton. And, one guy's a stand-up comedian that is funny, and the other guy is a fighter that thinks he's funny. So I can only imagine, how painful that is to listen to.
I'm a big fan of Jim Norton as well, and talking about radio being put in podcast form as well. Like that's, the Opie and Jimmy show, or back in the day, the Opie and Anthony show. That was one of the first things that got me into podcasts as well. Was it was the easiest way to consume their show, and suddenly you just start branching off, and the next thing you know, you've got a 20-odd podcasts in your feed every morning.
Yeah, it's funny with Opie and Anthony. Like, I grew up in Massachusetts, and they were just they were local DJs in Worcester, Massachusetts, just the Opie and Anthony show. And so I grew up kind of listening to them when I first was getting into, like, music in general. Like, before punk and hardcore, it was, like the new metal phase. Like, they were on WAAF, which is Massachusetts real rock station, so they were playing like Korn and stuff like that, your Limp Bizkit and like super cool music like that. But
that's real rock right there.
Oh yeah, dude. Oh yeah, super heavy. And I remember those guys being on the radio, and they got fired for doing a hoax on Valentine's Day of that the mayor was in a car accident and he had died, and so they got fired for that. And then they went into like I think they got into the New York market or Sirius or something like that somehow, and then they became a totally different thing. So like getting fired actually probably did better for them than they would have ever done on some local shitty new metal station in the middle of Massachusetts that nobody cares about. So I actually remember I called them one time. I got like because there always have people call in and tell jokes, and I was probably like 9 years old and called them with a joke. I can't remember what it was, but they were very polite, and they're like, yeah. I was like, all right, see ya.
They didn't give you the silent treatment when someone rings up and they deliberately be silent for about a minute and the caller's just sitting there waiting. It's so good.
like, hello? But yeah, no, they were polite enough. They probably recognized, like, this is a kid. Just get him off the line. But who knows where podcasting is going to go? I mean, I remember like 3 years ago, there was the people that claimed they owned the patent to podcasting, and they were going to shut it all down, and they were suing Adam Carolla and like Mark Maron and everything. So who knows what will ever happen? But everything's going to be in on-demand format in some way. And podcast is basically just radio on demand.
Yeah, convenience always sort of rolls out at the end of the day. People will take the path of least resistance, and if that happens to be just, I can watch this or listen to this whenever I want, as opposed to having to make sure I'm at my TV by 8:30 or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't even imagine having to be home and being like, oh, Simpsons are on at 8:30. I have to run home. Not that I'm going to be watching The Simpsons in their current incarnation anyway. But, as a child, making sure, what was I doing on Sunday at 8 o'clock as a 12-year-old anyway? There was nothing else. I had to be in school the next day. So, of course, I was at home at 8 o'clock. I don't know what I'm talking about.
It's yeah. If anything, I suppose the one thing you'd get out of it is maybe it's a good alibi. If maybe you're accused of a crime or something, you could say, well, I was definitely here because I know that The Simpsons had this thing on, and it's like, oh, he must have seen it. He must have been home.
Yeah, podcast totally ruined all alibis. Like I know exactly where I was. I was listening to the Adam Carolla show at that very moment. And, I couldn't possibly do it on my iPhone as I was out murdering somebody.
Yeah, multitasking. So what does the future hold for the Edgeland podcast? Where you want to go with it? Do you have any dream guests or different things you want to try?
Oh, the white whale is, of course, Ian Mackay. Getting him on the show, that would be great. But,
I had that written down. I'm like, have you asked Ian?
I did have a conversation with him, unrecorded, and he was very polite, and it was a nice conversation. So even just crossing that off my bucket list of, I talked to the man, is enough, satisfying enough for me. But, he just told me his concerns and all that, and where, like, I invented, helped coin the term, but I don't really know what it is at this point. And he's like, I don't think people want to hear from me. Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody say. That is so dumb. But no, he was very polite, and the podcast. It's just scheduling is the bane of my existence with podcasts. Like this week, I'm not even going to have a podcast because too many things got in the way. I don't know. My life hasn't changed all that much, except for I'm busier with the website. I do the Hard Times now. I'm much busier with that, and that's kind of like takes up a lot more time of doing things, and also maintaining a healthy relationship with my fiancée, so not totally neglecting her all the time and just being like, sorry, babe, I got to talk to some guy that was in a hardcore band for 2 years back in 1994. I can't possibly hang out with you right now and eat dinner together. So, you know, it's a tough balance of that, and the days just go by so fast, you know. Life would be easier if you didn't have a day job, but unfortunately, podcast, I don't have that Joe Rogan money, so, you know, still going to maintain the normal lifestyle and just figure out how to balance doing stand-up comedy, doing the hard times, doing a podcast, and then not going insane.
Well, you got to chat in with Ian Mackay, even if it was off the record. So would you say podcasting makes dreams come true?
It absolutely did for me, because, you know, when I was 12 years old and got the Minor Threat complete discography, I didn't imagine I would ever be talking to Ian Mackay at some point. And, you know, the first Edgeland episode I did was with Mark McCoy of Charles Bronson, and that was one of a very seminal band in my development as far as, you know, hardcore is concerned. They were a goofy power violence band that didn't take anything seriously, and I could have easily have just gotten into super heavy, shitty moshcore music and just be the worst person in the world that takes everything super seriously and like punches people all the time. But instead, a little bit more lighthearted, I guess. And I can say that bands like Charles Bronson definitely had that influence with like, oh yeah, straight edge is good, but don't take everything so seriously. Yeah,
there's certainly, you know, Saint, just if you're, you know, happen to be edge or whatever.
Oh yeah. I had a ex-girlfriend once tell me, just because you're straight edge doesn't mean you're not an asshole. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. That's a very apt analysis.
After talking to Bill, I realised podcasting does tie in nicely with that punk DIY mentality. No one gives you a podcast, you just start one up yourself. And like a punk band, maybe you're just playing to half a dozen of your friends at first. You'll be sort of niche, or niche for my American audience. But it's the Wild West, anything goes. If 1 week I want to do a big, fully researched, investigative journalism episode, I can. If the next week I want to just have a chat and a laugh with a mate over a couple of drinks, well, that works too. Podcasting is super fun like that, and it's this new medium that can really be whatever you want it to be. One episode's 25 minutes, the next one's 40, the next maybe 19. Who cares? Get off my back, man. It's freedom, anarchy via RSS feed. An episode of your favourite podcast might come out twice a week or once a month, or just show up in your feed out of the blue as a nice surprise. Of course, there are best practices that have proven successful for the more professional podcast, which is why I've tried to put out What a Predicament on the same day every week, Sunday morning New Zealand time. But all this dovetails quite nicely into an announcement from everyone here at What a Cat Productions, which is to say, just me. This episode has been the final episode of Season 1 of What a Predicament. I'm going to take some time to process everything I've learnt from Daniel and Bill today and redouble my efforts to make the next season of What a Predicament bigger and better, with another 10 episodes on the way just as soon as they're done. I'm already working on it. I've reached out to some people that I'll be really stoked if I get to talk to, so it's not too far away, but as Bill and I discussed, balancing work, having a partner, trying to take on more and more adult responsibilities, I think doing it this way, runs of 10 episodes at a time, is the perfect balance that gives me the time I need to make each episode as good as it can be. So if you want to be up to date and not miss next season, subscribe to What a Predicament in iTunes and or like the Facebook page, facebook.com/whatapredicament. Follow me on Twitter at WhatACatProd and or Instagram at WhatACatProductions, and I'll keep you up to date with how the new season's coming along and when to expect it. I'm also thinking of just doing some simpler, shorter mini episodes in the meantime as I'm working on this season 2. I'm currently thinking of calling them like What a Predicament Thumbnails. It's a title that's a work in progress because they're not big picture episodes, they'll just be little picture ones, little thumbnails, but yeah, as I said, work in progress. So if you've enjoyed What a Predicament at all so far, please rate and review the show in iTunes. Everyone says apparently that's the way. you get more of an audience. That makes it go higher up the charts and be more visible in people's feeds and that sort of thing. And to make it as easy as possible, there's a link to What a Predicament in the iTunes store right at the top of the podcast's official website, whatacat.co.nz. Thank you for downloading and listening to this episode. You can catch all the previous episodes at whatacat.co.nz. Thanks to Bill Conway from edgelandpodcast.com and thehardtimes.net. Thanks to Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity podcast.com. Thanks to Alex Wilkinson and Lucas Hogan. Thanks Graveless for loaning me their song Like the Wolf. You can check that out and more Gravelessness by searching Graveless on Bandcamp. The opening theme music for this podcast wasn't Graveless, but was a derivative of The Little Hotel of Horrors by Decamentarium, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0, don't you know? This podcast is a What a Cat production. If you have any feedback or predicament ideas for next season, you can reach me by email, whatacatproductions@gmail.com. Maybe the first episode of the new season can be the predicament of being lost at sea, stranded in the great Pacific garbage patch. All this water and not a drop to drink. In fact, the only thing worse would be if suddenly oh no! Not again. Dude, all those Save the Whale people can go jump in a lake. If you couldn't tell, I've been swallowed whole by a whale. I guess that's what I get for podcasting. I put myself out there and then act surprised when someone consumes me. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad you did. But this whale, on the other hand, what a predicament.
That's a very apt analysis.